New Aphotic Realm announcement. Submission windows for upcoming issues. Issue 10, the theme is justice. That's hard-boiled fiction with a supernatural twist. The deadline for that will be April 1st, 2020. Issue 11, the theme is kaiju, giant monsters terrorizing civilization. Deadline will be October 1st, 2020 for those stories. Issue 12, the theme is lycanthropy, which is, of course, self-explanatory. It can be any type of animorph with a bloody twist. So I guess that's werewolves and giant, I don't know. What do people turn into? Seals? I've just got a little seal on my desk, so I thought of that. I don't know. You'll have to be more imaginative than I just was. But the deadline for lycanthropy, January 1st, 2021. Good luck to everyone submitting.
This thing, I hope you like it. Let's talk about it, yeah. Let's lose track. Losing the Plot Podcast. Losing the Plot Podcast. Losing the Plot Podcast. Talking to Leo X.
So, this episode we're talking again with Jeanne Spicuzza because we had such a lovely long chat the first time that we didn't even get through. I think we got through half my questions and I had another half left, so we went on to another episode. And then we talked so long in this episode that it became part 3 as well. So this is part 2 of a part 3 chat with Jeanne Spicuzza. I just had such a lovely time talking to her. I don't get to talk to her enough. And we have so much in common. We love to talk about films, and I'm fascinated by her film projects and her ideas that go into it as a writer, director, actor. So I hope you enjoy it. As always, if you're a reader, writer, any kind of creative who wants to be on the show, or maybe you just want to tell me something about it, you can always do so using losingtheplotpodcast-at-gmail-dot-com, and I look forward to hearing from you. That's all my intro chat, so here is my conversation with Jeanne Spicuzza.
How have you been? So you were just doing your podcast?
Mm-hmm. And we covered The Uninvited, 1944, with Ray Milland and Gail Russell. It was really one of the first Hollywood ghost stories that was like an A-list level Hollywood ghost story. And it is a really interesting and influential film. Apparently, it inspired Benicio del Toro and Martin Scorsese and other people too. They talk about it. So it was very interesting film, and it was supposed to take place in England, but they shot it in Northern California on a cliff. The magic of movies.
I know, right? Yeah, I always tell people to invent their own geography. You know, yeah. It's like it takes place where you say it does. That's how it works.
That's how it works. Me personally, though, I have to say, like on Night Rain, for example, I was really big on wanting to shoot in the actual locations because the actual locations are so historic and have so much personality. And we were able to do that largely because it was over the holidays when most productions were, already shut down for the season. And so they didn't really have many people wanting to film or anybody wanting to film. So things were less expensive and easier and less traffic, in certain areas. So that's what helped make that possible and affordable. So that's a little secret there. There are times of year where you can get better deals for locations and other things too, like sometimes equipment, even because it's a slow time, tricky. So that'll work. I'll do them.
But tell me, like, what have you been up to with your week? What's been going on?
This has been a strange week. My husband Guy's father passed away, and I had to take him to and from the airport. He was 92, so thankfully it was not a tragedy. He lived a very full life. He basically died very peacefully. His heart just kind of gave out. 92. guy's doing okay, but it made my week a little strange and blurry. Like everything kind of felt a little odd. And of course, it's like we're coming towards the election, so everything feels odd.
Oh yeah, of course.
Because people are crazy right now and insane right now. And then I went and I looked at my dream house. My dream house, I can tell you my dream house. I didn't tell anybody publicly because I have stalkers. But my dream house is the house that was that Kim Basinger's character Lynn Bracken lived in LA Confidential.
Ooh,
Yeah.
very cool.
Yes, very cool. And it hasn't been for sale in 60 years. So for the time I've lived in LA, it's always been lived in. And this is the first opportunity I ever had to even look at it. And I was just like, this is really cool because that movie had a big impact on me. And to actually be inside of the house was like, oh, wow, this is awesome. Yeah, like, this is my house. So it's like, I was kind of like, hi, neighbors, this is my house. I was like,
Nice. What is it? Have you seen the Sex and the City movie?
I did.
Oh yeah, when she's like, "Hello, I live here."
Yeah. That's funny. You remember that? That's true. And she put her shoes in there, and so it's like, yes, this is my house. Hello, everyone. This is my kitchen. Come on in. Let's have a little something to drink. We have some water here. Okay. So I was just kind of playing the hostess in the house. I was looking, and then they called my real estate agent and they were like, oh, we've had a couple other offers, but we really would love her to buy it. And that's always nice to hear. We'd love for her to buy it. And I'm thinking, well, if I can make a few $1 million in like the next couple of weeks or months or something, I'll let you know. Because I'm thinking there's no way I can afford this. But I don't know. It's funny. I was thinking about that though this morning. I was like, well, when I moved to LA, because I wanted to make movies and I knew I was a writer and I was a single mom at the time, and I had no idea how this was all going to work out. So, I mean, I have had situations where I've just kind of taken the plunge, not being very practical or realistic, but it works out that way. I think when you're an artist, maybe being practical and realistic are overrated.
Because especially when like your whole profession is just like, what does my gut say today? Like
it is so much that, and because it is, I mean, there is, I always joke, I'm like, wow, I'll be, when I made The Scarapist, I was like, wow, I'm an overnight sensation. It only took me 15 years. It's like, so the odd thing about this is that it's true too, where this is, as I think John Cusack once famously said, how can you not be manic in this profession? Because it's so like up and down. It's so extreme. 1 minute you think you're going to make a $6 million or $8 million movie. The next minute it completely drops out and you're back to like, how the heck am I going to pay my rent or something? It is a very manic profession. So it's a very manic existence. So it's not unheard of that you could be looking at a house and within a month or two or less, suddenly a deal goes through and you're like, yay, yippee. Or the reverse. I've seen it happen in reverse where producers that have made very notable material suddenly put their Malibu houses on the market because their project doesn't go through, 2 projects don't go through, something dries up, they have something happen within their families or anything, and basically now they can't afford their mortgages. So this is, people don't realize the glamorous existence in Hollywood it's built on a fault line. I think that doesn't escape my attention, that it's all built on a fault line. So there's something always a bit unsteady. And I don't think it's something you'd ever really want to rely on. It's better if you've got good friends, good family, a strong sense of identity, because it does seem like the ones who don't carry that end up being an unfortunate casualty of Hollywood. So it's not, I would not call it reliable. That's definitely not an adjective I would use to describe. And Hollywood itself is so odd now because it's like you've got Netflix, you've got Amazon, you've got these like non-brick and mortar studios making more content than the studios, and you've got these studios that end up looking like ghost towns and nobody's there because they're just not producing like they used to. So it's a very unstable environment. It's a very unstable in both directions. It could go up any minute, it could go down any minute. That's just not get too attached to it. I think.
Well, I mean, also, I was looking into like, I mean, I'm constantly looking at like the budgets of films and how people did things all the time for research. And like, if you go back 10 years, it seems like even the cost in the last 10 years has absolutely dropped in terms of like the technology you can get that does really high quality stuff. But that didn't instantly make everyone amazing at making films. That just made it more accessible to them.
You're right, and that's another thing you're so right about, and you're on point about, is that it isn't the case that just because they don't share the vision, it doesn't mean they're not good at what they do. It just means that it's just not a good marriage. You know, you think about it this way. Someone's posted this recently, a director I know. She posted something. She was like, there are many people in your life you can love, but not many you can spend your life with. That's not personal relationships. That's also true in creative and professional relationships, because I've noticed that too. Like, I see where it's working and where it's clicking and where it's like, yeah, we're just not sharing vision at all. Some people are very good at what they do, and they maybe direct or edit or work on documentaries, which is a certain pacing, you know. But then when you have suspense, thriller, horror, that's a totally different genre. It's a whole different way of thinking. One of the things I did notice about my editor this time is like, I could definitely see that my sense of suspense was more in keeping with like the Hitchcockian sense of suspense, whereas he's very technically good, but he's not really a suspense oriented person. So like when you reveal something in a movie has a huge impact on the audience's response to it.
Mm-hmm.
Give you an example. Originally, the way he edited the scene with the Alan character, because we can talk. We're not gonna. This isn't gonna be out there, right? So no spoil. When something happens, you know, to the Alan character, he originally revealed the whole thing right away, and I was like, no, don't show that yet. Let the reveal happen when the Thomasina character opens the door and turns on the light. That's when you want to be confronted with what has really happened.
Yeah.
That's a much bigger reveal than if you reveal it sooner.
Yeah.
So these are things that I realized, wow, I never realized that when it comes to suspense, my sense of suspense is definitely stronger. And then that's going to affect, for example, how you communicate with the crew, because he frequently communicated with the crew. I love the cinematography, but I can see how there might have been aspects of cinematography that might have made it more suspenseful. If you would have shot it a certain way. And I think you can say that about any movie. I'm probably going to be doing this the rest of my life going, oh my God, what if we'd done this? But at a certain point, you have to say, okay, uncle, it's done. I have to stop picking at this movie. But I can see where hopefully I take that forward in my learning. So I can keep going and apply that. Yeah.
That's why it remains compelling, is because you'll never be done with it. Like there's never a point where you go, oh, okay, I've done it. I know all the, like, don't tell me anything about cinematography anymore, because I know all the angles, all the lights. Like, never.
No. Yeah, never. You will never outlearn not just the technology, but the craft. And as soon as somebody does something, you know, like you have somebody come along and do a Blair Witch Project or something, and you're like, oh, it's not that what they're doing is unheard of. There's an influence, you know, of other found footage or documentary style filmmaking and things of that nature, but it's the way you put it together. So someone comes along and they, like, this is what we were talking about with The Uninvited. And that's probably one of the reasons why The Uninvited isn't a perfect movie. I think in a similar way that I would say it would be easy to say The Scarapist is not a perfect movie. I don't know if there is such a thing where you cannot imagine it being any, or a shot being different or something. But I think the reason I'm proud of The Scarapist, one of the reasons, besides the fact that I went through that, survived it, and made something creative out of it instead of letting it destroy me, is it shifted cinema. It's not gotten that recognition, and that doesn't always happen with films where it gets the recognition. It kind of does. People sort of go, what is it? What is the genre? I don't understand. And they kind of are doing that with Night Rain too, because it's like, well, when you're doing something that is unique, people are going to kind of be, some people are going to be on board. Some people are going to go, what are you doing exactly? But yet it's going to have an influence on other people in their movies, whether they're aware of it or not.
Mhm.
Because in the wake of The Scarapist, we talked about this before, you had Get Out, you had episodes of Criminal Minds, you had movies like Unsane, and all these other movies like Ma, and suddenly you had these female-driven Greta thrillers or multi-genre films that were horror, thriller, dark comedy,
Mhm.
that used noir elements, which was
Mhm.
a dirty word, especially in Hollywood for so long. Before The Scarapist, psychological horror, psychological thriller, yes, but psychological horror, like hypnosis. You saw some of these elements in the old 40s films, in the films noir, but you weren't really seeing that in contemporary films until The Scarapist. So I'm very proud of that fact, even if. So you're right. You can never outlearn it, because even on Night Rain, I'm like, oh wow, I would do this now. I would do this now. It's like, I just think
Yeah.
that's just going to be the case, that you can just see that. And I guess you're right. That's a good sign, because you want to keep carrying it forward, and you'll never stop learning.
Oh,
You'll just,
absolutely. And then you think about what everyone else does, which is stop before they even start. Like, I was talking to them about like my idea is a film that we're going to film in the library, and then they were like, "Do we have permission to film in the library?" First of all, I'm not going to ask. But secondly, like,
doesn't matter.
yeah, and I was just like, yeah, I don't care. But also, like, can you let me finish a sentence before you start telling me what's wrong with what I'm doing? And like people are just, it's that fear that's just geared up to. Oh, my light's died. It's that fear that's geared up to like protect themselves, right? By telling themselves that there is a reason that they don't need to go through with this. That's all it is. Yeah,
Like
blinkers. There you go.
last time. And also, let's face it, people have a very hard time with criticism. If they're already thinking, they're really afraid, what if people don't like it? What if audiences don't like it? What if other filmmakers say it's bad? I'll tell you, if you let that into your lungs and heart and start breathing that fear, you will probably never make anything. I know a filmmaker or a screenwriter like that, where he's almost like a cautionary tale, because he wanted to make his Michelangelo's David as his first picture. And I said, well, you realize that Michelangelo, who was a little smelly and liked to sleep with little boys, by the way, was not a perfect person.
Pretty good sculptor, though.
Say. And the thing is, I studied art history in Italy, and Michelangelo was one of the artists we studied, and the David was not his first sculpture.
Yeah.
He made a lot of work, some work that we will never even see, long before he got to that point. So in other words, if the idea is, I have to be here in order to be an artist, in order to even get started, well, you're denying this whole process.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, it's more like this whole process, it's so up and down. And like, one person gave me such interesting feedback on Night Rain. They said it was really confusing. That's the second person who told me that the plot was really confusing. And I was like, okay, well, I did have one person say, yeah, it's confusing, but in a Memento kind of way, like in a good way, because all the clues are there. It's not that the clues aren't there. It's just that for some people, apparently it's hard to follow. And then he said, I have to say, The Scarapist held my attention more. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And The Scarapist had a lot more music in it. On the other hand, I feel like Night Rain, like you mentioned, it's more complex. The plot is more complex. You have more characters. You have many more cameras. The cinematography is much, more elaborate.
Yeah. But that helps you see the different layers of it, because there's parts that are filmed as if they are a film noir in black and white, and then there's other parts that are filmed in different colors. And yeah, no, it's fine. I mean, it's
deliberate, by the way. Every single moment of how it's filmed is completely deliberate. It is not accidental. When she's inside of the film versus out, you'll notice it even in the first sequence when I'm on the chaise. And there are scenes that you see her in the black and white. That's where she's inside of the film. Or when we pull out and you can actually see the camera on her. and it's back in color. And all of those things had to be done. All of those things had to be extremely thought out how
Yeah.
it's done. So see, I think maybe because you're a filmmaker, you can also appreciate how much went into that, because a ton of thought went into this movie. So
Mhm.
much thought went into this movie, that it literally took me 8 years to make it.
Well, I can tell. I mean, like, The Scarapist is like a great original suspense tale about a feud between two women. And then Night Rain is a story about a true crime story, a woman making a film, a woman who looks like Elizabeth Short, who may be Elizabeth Short, who was Elizabeth Short. What is noir? It's a film being made in a film, and she's at risk. Like, there's so much more going on to it.
There's so much more going on.
Yeah.
And one person said, well, I can't even compare because, it's a more complex script. It's more characters. The acting requires a lot more.
Mhm.
It really, again, this is the interesting thing. So I actually compiled, which I haven't posted this publicly because I'm almost afraid to do so. It's like because it's almost like my own kind of private joke / lament. Here's an example of some of the things I've heard about Night Rain. This is just some of the feedback.
Mhm.
You look beautiful. I put in parentheses, thank you. You look tired. Yeah, I put in parentheses, you look tired in
Who
parentheses.
told you that?
Someone just recently told me this. I said, in parentheses, I said I was doing like 3 jobs at the same time. It's confusing. In parentheses, I put, oh, yeah, it's confusing, but in a good way, in a memento sort of way. I put in parentheses, I love the music, in parentheses, yay. The music doesn't seem to fit, in parentheses. Oh, the acting is good. Some of the acting is good. The plot is simple. It's really complex. So, I mean, the bottom line is, here's an example of where if you listen to all the voices,
Mhm.
you are going to be like the person who ultimately, when you're painting and it ends up looking like mud, because if you try to curtail your movie, on the one hand, you want to communicate with audiences, and that's true. And on the other hand, you've got to put forth a vision, and that's true. And those two things at times are almost in battle with each other,
Have
or
you
opposed to each other.
have you ever read Charlie Kaufman has a script called Frank or Francis?
Oh, I never read that.
Have you not? It was never made, but it's a musical about film critics, and in it there is like a computer intelligence that they train to make the perfect film. And the computer intelligence, they call it God, and it makes the perfect film, but everyone who looks at it sees something different.
That's
So
actually
it's a different film for everyone. And they're all like, this is the best film I've ever seen, but every time they go in to see it, each different person sees something different. So I thought that was very clever.
I love Charlie Kaufman. He's one of my favorite contemporary screenwriters. When he was being interviewed, apparently, I don't know, I might have even told you the story. He was being interviewed by a group of journalists.
Mhm.
And one of the it was like one of these, interview in the round kind of things. And so I think there were at least 8 different journalists there. One of them was from Rolling Stone, and said, well, now you really put yourself in kind of a challenging position with this screenplay being John Malkovich, because I mean, what if he hadn't done it? And he said, well, I didn't actually think it was ever going to get made, quite frankly. And this journalist says, and here's the difference between writers and journalists. He says, well, if you didn't think it was going to get made, why did you write it? And without missing a beat, Charlie Kaufman responds, because I'm a writer. I thought it was just like genius. And that was the raw person. He did not have time to pre-prepare that. And it was so direct and so straightforward the way he said it that you knew it was true, that he's got the spirit of the writer inside of him, that whether it gets made or not, he's going to write it.
Yeah.
Because he's a writer, because that's who he is and that's what he does. And I just love him. And I hadn't read this screenplay, but it sounds actually awesome and brilliant, because
I'll see if I've got it. I'll send it to you if I've got it. Yeah.
God, if you have it like a PDF, or I love reading. And by the way, I really applaud that you're reading scripts. I can't think of a single screenwriting person. I think I told you about John August and Craig Mazin, who have this show, Script Notes, a podcast.
Okay, yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and they talk about that a lot. Like, they would always have people who were interning that with them wanting to be screenwriters just read tons and tons of scripts, because you learn so much from reading scripts. I wish I did it more. I've read a number of scripts, and I've been doing it since I was relatively young, or books based on movies. But I actually just realized that it literally took me like a month or two to get through one book recently. And I was like, this is so sad. I'm looking forward to getting to the point. In fact, I'm thinking about this, taking a little time between Night Rain and Making Angels, because I want more time to read more things before going back into the Making Angels screenplay to make it into a shooting script. Because as much time as I spent on Night Rain, the one thing I didn't do was I didn't spend as much time in pre-production as I could have, with meetings with my team. And I'm very impressed with what we accomplished, and on the budget we accomplished it in the time we did. Even if we'd had a little more time, it would have been a challenge, because we had this narrow window where my editor, co-director, Cynthia Sharp, was available. He had to take vacation time from his day job before the end of the year. We also only had the Biltmore for a certain time period, because we had it at that price that we could afford it, because it was during the holidays when they were willing to give it to us at that particular price, which was really low compared to what it normally would have been. So we kind of had to do what we did. And I guess that does lend itself, because you get the sense that these filmmakers are a little stressed. We were shooting so many pages a day. I mean, 8 to 10 pages was insane, especially for that content. So I'm really impressed with how it turned out. But if I could, with Making Angels, for example, I'd spend maybe even 3 months in pre-production before going into production, to make sure certain things are communicated, to make sure certain people who say they do what they do really do what they do. That's sad to say, but true.
That reminds me, I like my club, we meet on Monday evenings, and somebody else promised that they're going to do the presentation. They make music videos, so they're going to do a presentation and show some of the music videos that they did. And I was like, this was on last Monday, we agreed. I was like, do you need more time? Can you be there? Are your children ill? Like, are you going to show up? And so tomorrow I need to message him and say, do you remember you agreed to do this tomorrow? And then I need to prepare a backup thing in case he goes, oh, sorry. Because I don't trust anyone to do or remember anything ever, which doesn't make me a good filmmaker, because you need to delegate, and I can't do it.
Filmmaker, actually.
Okay.
Leo, it makes you an excellent filmmaker, because you are absolutely correct. You cannot ever assume or take anything for granted. There is something about this creative process, and especially when you're dealing with, it's not do or die, like people will lose their rentals or something if they don't show up. I also very knockwood proud of my team, because I heard horror stories, and I even heard horrors. I had one woman tell me that she's on the board at Screen Actors Guild, known as SAG. And you've probably heard of SAG.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've heard of them. And so she's on the board. So she said, because I said, well, she was doing a web series, or working to do a web series. And I said, well, you could always hire non-union. She said, oh, no, I'm going to do union. And I said, so why are you doing union? And she said, because I want to make sure they show up, they're professional. And I'm like, I've never had that issue with non-union actors. My actors and crew have always been very professional. But that's a perception. That's a perception in certain circles of the industry, that you have to be a member of a guild, that you have to be part of an agency or a studio in order to be professional. Well, here's where it gets interesting. So I shoot an entire motion picture, and everybody shows up, does a great job, very professional, very proud of everybody who worked on it. She's like halfway through the web series, just maybe a week in or 2 weeks in, and her lead actor shows up. He had shaved his head. And she's already shot all these scenes with him with hair. And she came to me, she was like crying. She was like, I don't understand why he would do that. But I hired SAG actors specifically because I thought they would be so professional and they do what I asked. And I said, well, maybe the unfortunate thing is he may have gotten some kind of role that maybe paid a little more. We don't know what the reason was. Well, and then I signed the agreement. I hadn't even shown it to my attorney when I signed it. I'm like, you didn't show the SAG agreement to your attorney? No, because I'm the board there. I just figured it would be okay because it's SAG. I'm like, I hate to tell you this. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but those SAG agreements, they are like mafia contracts. They basically say if you don't do certain things, if you don't pay your actors a certain amount or a certain way, even for rehearsals, they can literally take your film like a security instrument. They treat it like a security, and they can take your film and it will never see the light of day. And it's embedded in their agreements. That is embedded in their agreements. Yes. This is one of the reasons up to this point, it did not make any sense for me to work with SAG actors, unless you are hiring an actor that will give you foreign distribution, that will get you a certain box office. That is the dirty secret they don't want to tell you, because of course agents want you to hire their actors. Now, I had one person recently chew me out because she's a SAG actor, and she was like, you should be hiring SAG people. We're practically starving. You should be hiring us. And I'm like, forgive me, that's your business. If you want to be hired, you have to do your own marketing. You have to put yourself out there, get into a lot of projects so that you are a marketable name for someone to hire. That is not my responsibility as a producer to support you, to make sure there's food on your table. This is the bizarre things that go on within filmmaking. It's just a deep misunderstanding. So you have the right approach, Leo. One of the reasons I say this is because you approach it like, well, what can I learn? How much can I learn? Who can I work with? Who can't I work with? That's really what the process of film, that's actually a big part of the process of filmmaking, and never being able to assume somebody's going to do what they say they're going to do or be who they are. You can never, ever assume it. You can never assume it. Unfortunately, that is the way it is. That's even true in some of the paid sectors. We're just getting somebody on a plane because they've gone on a bender and had a long evening with whatever they're doing. That happens.
Well,
it happens.
it's just, I think it's just true about life in general, or it is about the life I want to lead. Because I mean, I work as an engineer as my day job, and there's like I've talked about this before, the very meritocratic approach of who has the best job, like whose business card should you get and stuff. And it's like, I want the business card of the guy or the woman who like I can get along with, because I can work well with somebody that I can get along with. And like, I want to hang out with people who are like my genuine friends. Like, there's so many forces that conspire away, like from teaching you that very basic lesson about who you should be spending your time with, what brings you joy, and what work is for, which is like self-fulfillment. And
it's
enough money to put like a roof over your head and like good times.
Yes. And that doesn't mean, like all friendships, that doesn't mean you'll always agree on everything. And we talked about this before too, what you want to see happen, and which I loved did happen at times in Scarapist and Night Rain, was, and you do have to pick your battles, but if there's a moment where it's like, okay, I don't agree with it. Okay, let's talk this out then. Let's determine why you see it this way and I see it that way, because sometimes something really good comes out of that, but it's a willingness to work through that also, which I think is a factor. Because I can definitely say that I used to joke. My cinematographer was like, of course you love Cynthia. That's my, co-director, editor on both The Scarapist and Night Rain. Of course you love him. I said, of course I do. I didn't say I like him. And then we were laughing, because there was a joke in there. But the point was that, no, we don't get along or agree 100% of the time. It's a willingness to work through that and find a solution that works. That's what makes it happen. And that's what also makes it really rewarding. So what you don't want then is somebody who you're constantly butting heads with, constantly, and maybe they're just doing that just because they want their way, not because it works better for the project. In other words, there's really no room for someone to win the assertion of their ego in a creative project, because that's not what
no. Got to keep
You
your
know what I'm
ego out
talking
of it. Absolutely.
It doesn't work.
It's not about that. And
But
thankfully,
people, sadly, I've worked, and those are the people, by the way, I can't work with. The ones for whom it's about gratifying their own ego, regardless of whether it's good for the project or not, because self gratification of their ego becomes more important
yeah.
than the actual creative work. And usually those people don't end up lasting because the audience doesn't respond to that. The audience couldn't care less if they're getting gratified in their ego. They just want to see something that they can really get into and enjoy.
No, and like people have come to my club, and some of them, one guy studied this at university, was teaching it to other people, and was like insufferable. And like because he'd done this, like every lesson, like there had to be a little moment for him to say something incorrect, which he often did. And like we all had to, I had to sit and listen because I was like, yes, but he really needs this for his ego. And it's like, that's so disruptive to what we're doing here that I actually don't care. Like I'm sure, I mean, you're like genuinely in the industry. You've met hundreds of this guy, I'm sure. But
Well,
yeah, go
but
for it.
you know what? I know who you're describing though. And again, these are the people that often don't last because nobody likes like a know-it-all. See, no, I'm not going to mention names, but there was someone who gave me some unsolicited feedback.
Oh, there you go. Don't take it. Yeah, unsolicited.
Right. It's like unsolicited feedback where it was like, well, some of the acting was good in Night Rain. Some of the acting was good. I was really confused. I mean, you looked really good. I mean, you could use this for your reel. And I'm just like, no. I'm making a motion picture. No, this is not, no. And this was the same person who was like, oh, you're co-director. Have you actually directed anything? It's like, co-directing is directing. Why do we have to do this, guys? Why do you have to feel better about yourself for a moment by making other people feel smaller? I really think some of these people step into a circle just to feel better about themselves. They try to identify the person. They try to identify the person whom they may even feel a little bit envious of because you're doing it and they're not. But they feel they're better and they know more somehow. In fact, what's interesting is the ones who give, I always joke that advice doesn't come with insurance, because they're not the ones who have to live the consequences.
Advice doesn't come with insurance. That's
You like
brilliant.
that? Advice doesn't come with insurance. Advice doesn't come with insurance. They're not the ones who have to live the consequences. They do not have to live the consequences of that advisement. And what's more, I mean, there is always, I think with advisement comes a kind of a tone of superiority, whether it's intended or not. I know better than you do. Here's what I think you should do. There's a little bit of controlling in there. So definitely the ego is a bit invested. And feeling, again, this is where feeling like I have to feel like I know more becomes more important than what is good for the group, what is good for the club. And it comes from insecurity. I guess that's why I still kind of am like, okay, I have a certain tolerance level for that because I'm like, okay, just like this person I'm referring to, it's like I have a certain tolerance level because I get it. This is obviously coming from a place of insecurity. However, I have a threshold. There's a point where I'm kind of like, okay, now you're just annoying me. Now you're not even contributing or pleasant to be with. And then I just I try to avoid it. It was only recently that, and this might come from my own ego, but I only recently had a realization. I've experienced a realization, which was, boy, there have been times in my life, and it's backfired, where I've actually told somebody, no, this is actually not right. This is right, thinking that would go well. Unfortunately, some people don't like that. They get really like, especially the level of insecurity, they can become like your worst enemy.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's happened to me before as well. Yeah.
It's horrible, isn't it? It's like, just because you've called them out and now they are your worst enemy.
Because you know what those people do? They collect ammunition on you for as long as they've been in your life, just in case you ever call them out, and then they'll throw it in your face. Yeah, it happened to me. Absolutely happened to me.
Shrapnel right in your face.
It was horrendous. Yeah.
Worst enemy. And sometimes they don't even want to let go. Sometimes, I mean, I apparently have people who have literally been stalking me. We've talked about this, who've been stalking. That's part of where Night Rain comes from, stalking and harassing me for like over 15 years. And it's still going. One person recently gave us a positive review on IMDb, and it went up like a couple of points. It went like from like a 4.7 to a 4.9. So like literally in less than 24 hours, someone went on there, voted it down again, then went on Amazon and voted it down. It's like, really? I'm like, are you, first of all, are you watching my stuff that closely? Like, I don't even watch my stuff that closely.
Yeah.
You discovered this before I even did, and you're already on there, like trying to like push it back down again. And it's like, honestly, what it makes me feel more than anything, I mean, of course it makes you a little upset or sad or angry, whatever, but it saddens me more than anything, because it's like, seriously, you guys, the amount of energy you put into this, you could be creating something instead.
Yeah.
You know, and now that the technology's there, it's not that hard to find ways to create things of your own rather than be destructive to somebody else's creativity. It is the strangest thing. I don't think I'll ever really understand the mentality.
Oh no,
that-
I think you get the right approach. It's just very, very sad. Like, what a painful existence these people must lead. There's a guy.
and say, can I do, it's like too scary because I don't know if they're dangerous, but part of me is tempted to be like, is there something I can do for you that would make you happier?
No,
You can't. It's too scary because you even do that, and the idea that they could feel happy when they've been sad or unhappy for so long, they might just, now they're not just going to bite your hand off, they'll bite your arm off, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's not. It's not your problem to fix.
Weird. It's so weird though. And I have to say though, it really aided the Night Rain process, because one of these stalkers was really coming after me after the Scarapist won this award at Berlinale, and just like went like ballistic. And so I was going through that while I was, going into the pre-production of Night Rain. And it, like, some of the things that I did, some of the aspects of that character were really fed by those real life experiences. And so I've had people who are like, oh yeah, how in the movie, this sort of series of events, she rejects him, like we talked about this, she rejects him, and it just so happens he has a tragedy at about the same time. And it's that intersection of events that produces this like obsession, this aggression towards this person. And I think anybody who's ever experienced that just kind of goes, because they know.
I did the same thing. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Right? It's like they know it's not something they did deliberately. So when one person actually asked me, so why is he there? And I don't want to give too much away, but why is he standing there before she's even rejected him, for example? I'm like, because we're in an industry where people often almost are on the border of stalking. They're trying so hard to put themselves forward to somebody that they're willing to like find out where they eat or find out where they live and take a walk in the neighborhood or whatever it might be.
But you're right to point out that it's in the industry, because like it's, the thing about it is it must seem so isolating, but you're not alone at all. Not only are you not alone, but it really has nothing to do with you, I mean,
when you say I'm not alone, I don't feel relieved because I feel good about that. It's more like somebody understands, like, kind of thing,
Yeah. It's like, as I get older, I love, like, if something ever happens to me, like, it feels so isolating when you're younger, but now I'm just like, I can't wait to find out, like, what combination of stuff that's already happened to other people just happened to me. And then I feel like, oh, okay, we're just going through the motions no matter what's happening. That's all right.
I wrote a poem once that was like, he grieves, she grieves, it grieves, they grieve. I gain no comfort in conjugation, was the way I phrased it. I gain knowing that other people experience this doesn't make me feel good, but knowing that there are people who survive it and who understand what it's like gives me a certain comfort. That someone can say, wow, you're not alone. In other words, I empathize, I understand with what you're going through.
Yeah.
You're not alone in what you're going through, because ironically, there is something about stalking. Of course, we know it's a form of abuse. It's a form of abuse to stalk, harass, malign other people. And it's a more insidious form in some ways when it's online, because it's easier to do now from anywhere in the world, and it's harder to prosecute or catch that person, not because they can't be found out. It's very expensive to do. One person told me, you can prosecute this person in a court, but it's going to probably cost you 6 figures to do so. I'm like, well, I'm in the middle of making a movie, so I have a choice. I can finish making a movie, go after this person. I'm going to make a movie, you know. But it's like the abuse is no less difficult and in some ways more insidious because you feel it, you feel the hurt, and it makes you feel somewhat isolated when it happens. You know, because this person is kind of pounding on you, saying, okay, I'm going to hack this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to go after this, I'm going to tell you what you suck, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And I can't lie, it does affect you, but you're right in the sense that it affects you differently as you get older, because you can step back and go, well, yeah, that made me feel bad for a little while, but I also realized that that's them, not me, kind of thing, you know? So you just have a different kind of wisdom and balance as you go through it.
For sure. I can't remember where I read it, but it's something like the line is like when somebody does something shameful to you, some of the shame rubs off on you. I think I've definitely felt that before.
We talked about that relative to the Scarapist that one time.
And of course.
I love the feedback. One of the listeners was like, this is amazing, because obviously they had experienced that.
Yeah.
And talked a lot about the whole thing of shame, you know, and how shame can be inflicted.
That's true. Yeah, we did. Yeah.
We had a really good conversation about it, that it really comes down to a sense of worth and self-worth. And that if you don't experience that sense of worth or self-worth, if it's built on shaky ground or just simply isn't there, that tends to happen. People tend to inflict outward. They tend to take that shame and inflict it outward. And why? It is a strange thing. Why? I guess the reason they pick you or me or somebody else is because we're a visible target. We're out there doing the work. And so
it's like, you know, it's not just us, like it's happened to, I've seen it happen time and again to basically like the nicest, most open-hearted people, like whoever is the most attractive target is the one, like what's the biggest good I could take out of the world? And it's like very fragile artistic benevolence is
that is really interesting that you say that, because someone asked me at one point when they were reading the script for the Scarapist, they said, so why does the Ilsa character move from Candace to Lana? And I say, because Lana is because Lana is really good food to devour, because she's got all these, you know, intellectual and creative complexities, because is open and eager and trusting. And because if someone is more closed off and less complex and not as welcoming, you're either afraid you're not going to be able to get in, or it's more work to get in. It's harder to shame a person who's already so deeply shamed. It's the person you see who's being themselves and who has found their self-worth. That's the person you attack. That's a really good point, actually, because
absolutely.
That does make sense. So in that sense, we're doing something right.
Yeah, it's a compliment. It's a type of compliment.
It's unfortunate that the internet has just, as I said, there are really great things about the internet, but one thing the internet has done is it has made it easier for some people to misuse it that way, though. Mm-hmm. You know, because now you can go after people globally. If it used to be, if you had a stalker, they had to at least be in your orbit. You know, all these old movies from the 80s where you see the stalkers always like hiding behind the bush or the tree, standing in an apartment looking across the way and so forth. Now you can do it from, you know, your own home, feeling anonymous, feeling emboldened by that from behind your own computer. And quite frankly, I'll say honestly, to think you're anonymous doing it and to do it from behind a computer and not even say who you are, I'm sorry to say this, but it is a bit cowardly too. I mean, it's like, wow, you're a stalker, but you're not even like a bold stalker. You're not even willing to confront me with it. You know, you're going to hide when you do it. Mm-hmm. I really don't like that very much. And I think, and again, like we were saying, I think at the end of the day, it's more sad than anything else.
Yeah.
It is sad than anything.
I've been reading a lot of science fiction lately, And a lot of very clever science fiction writers believe that it's not a good idea to contact like other intelligences if they exist. You should be trying to hide from them and not broadcast where you are, because if you have any kind of a power, then you represent a threat to them. And the most likely thing if you contact them is that they'll come and destroy you to make sure that you don't destroy them first.
Yeah.
And I thought it's a really interesting view of the universe, but it must also apply to Earth and us and the way we communicate with one another. If you go,
Yes.
if you broadcast around the world, I've done this, I've done that, like somebody's going to try and take you out, I think.
I used to joke about that because, you know, like you were saying in this business, like you'd see people standing on the corner, and why are they standing on the street corner instead of at home working or in their offices, talking about how I'm the next Steven Spielberg, I'm the next this or that. And I remember the first time I heard that, I said to someone, not to that person, but I said to a friend of mine, I was like, you know, isn't it interesting though? Madonna doesn't walk around talking about how famous she is because she just is. She doesn't have to do that. And in kind of a similar way, and I'm not even the biggest, I was never even the hugest Madonna fan. There were things that I liked about her. There were things I didn't necessarily like, but that was a fact. She was at one point one of the most famous women in the world. And she didn't, at that time, it was like, when I was, you know, saying that, I was like, she doesn't have to walk around talking about how famous she is. If you're doing what you're doing, chances are you're not the one standing on the street corner talking about it and using a megaphone and, you know, in all of these things. I mean, it's just, you just keep doing it. Just like the ones who are criticizing it are probably not the ones doing it either, because they could be spending their time doing something productive. It's a challenge. I like your idea. I think somehow, like, especially, you know, it's like Philip K. Dick and a lot of the science fiction, you know, Lovecraft, you know, addresses some of this stuff too. It's like in the Bradburys, you know, that was always the interesting thing I think about science fiction. And some of it was science horror, like Something Wicked This Way Comes, science fiction, where there are just some of the realities around what's happening may be fictional, but there's an essence of what's going on that is real.
The
Time Machine is another great example of that. You know,
love H.G. Wells,
right. And it's like, I'm so glad I brought that up, because that's one of my favorites too. And we share that. It's like, you know, you're starting with someone's deep and profound grief that drives him into this other world. And so, you know, to me, it's really, really fascinating that you can take something, these interesting science fiction. Of course, you also have things like, you know, Journey to the Moon and stuff, where, you know, it's like you're talking about something that actually, in a sense, predicted something that science would achieve, you know, later on. And so out of science fiction is born, you know, certain facts. So, and that's what I always find that so interesting. And there are other works of fiction like the Elroy fiction, where he's definitely drawing in a ton of true crime.
Yeah.
No, there are things about it. He said, that was one of the most interesting thing I've ever heard in an interview that he said. He said one of the most incredible things about writing true crime, you know, or true crime thrillers. He said, you have to go so over the top that it's almost outlandish, but you still have to maintain a certain realism. And those things seem to oppose each other, which they do. And that's the challenge. That's what can make it great writing. Just like in science fiction, that's what can make it great, is you're taking these fictional elements, you are simultaneously linking them to something that really could be real, that really could happen, that's really relatable with other people. That's what makes it, I think, fascinating. And a true craft. And that's what's interesting too, is there was a time where science fiction and true crime was not considered literature. It was considered to be pulp. It was considered to be kind of cheap, you know, but it has elevated itself over the years with Wells and with Lovecraft, people like Bradbury. It has elevated itself in a similar way that true crime, in the wake of people, it started with Poe, and then you've got people like Dashiell Hammett, you know, and Chandler, and these guys who really elevate it to a level of literature.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, it's like you're saying, because it hits on those like general classic principles of like being a human is why it's so compelling to keep reading, because it comes up with like an original analogy for something that we know to be true about life, is why you're still reading it 100 years later, no matter the genre.
And now it's a classic. And now it's a
Yeah.
classic. You know,
Yeah.
Bradbury is a classic. Wells is a classic. All these books are classics now.
Mhm.
You know, and they're read over and over, like you were saying too.
Yeah, for sure. I've got them all here. I've got like a little collection. Let me show you. I've got this wonderful Jules Verne.
That's who I was thinking of when I was thinking of Journey to the Moon. Oh my God.
No, you were right. It's this one? The First Men on the Moon.
Jules Verne.
Yeah.
Yep,
And then Time Machine, and I've never read this one, When the Sleeper Wakes. Oh, you can't see it because it's all blurry. But no, I don't know. But there's like this wonderful new collection of classics and stuff, and I keep buying them all. So Wells is definitely one of my favorites.
And this is the way to do, and this is a great way for you to do science fiction. What I've always found in poetry is if you stick with, you can always find the poet you love. For me, one of the first poets I fell in love with was E. Cummings. I love E. Cummings poetry. But if you only read one poet, like if you only read one science fiction writer, chances are you're going to end up because you're going to be influenced by anything, that you ingest. Mm-hmm. So if you only read the one, that influence is going to become so clear. Not that that's bad, but I think in reading many, it's like that's a great way to develop your own sensibility, drawing and being influenced by these people who came before us. Like the medievals used to say, we're just dwarfs standing on the shoulders of giants, referring to the classicists, and stuff, or the classics. And I feel kind of a similar way about motion picture, about poetry, any art form. It's like you're looking at so many diverse influences. And then from that, you can just draw and be inspired by that to create something of your own. Mm-hmm. And to me, create it yourself, it's your own. You can be inspired by, and you can cite those references. And there's no shame in that, because obviously that's exactly what the people like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells did before them. It doesn't just come out of nowhere. Yeah. People are inspired by those who came before. The writers of the true crime, when it was just pulp back in the early 30s into the 40s, they were clearly inspired by Poe, who was clearly inspired by some of the mystery writers who came before him. I mean, it's just, that's the way that art evolves. That's how it should evolve, really.
Well, when I come up with a new story idea and I'll go like, where did this come from? And then I'll start to realize what it was I read that inspired it. I'll go back and I'll make a list of what inspired it, and I'll read it again to really enhance those bits that I want to bring out. What is it I loved about these pieces that I want to bring out? I do it confidently because I've read enough and written enough for long enough that I trust my voice to be different. And also that if you're making a pastiche or an homage of enough things, then what you create is original anyway. If you pick 5 texts to pastiche or something, and on top of that you add your own thing, you've created something wildly original, because who's going to choose those 5 again? And if those 5 spoke to you personally, that's something to do with how you're original too. So
when I was working on, because when I first started writing The Scarapist, I was basing it almost exclusively on just my own experience. Then when I was beginning to build the shooting script and thinking about the movie, that's when I really started like reading a lot of books by James Cain and Dashiell Hammett, and like watching a lot of films noir. I was very, very influenced by that. And the double indemnity, and it's like, and like a lot of classes, the Blue Dahlia, and even some of the lesser known, which were known as like B films. Ironically, these were considered to be B films at the time. Now we don't really have that, the film that plays before the feature. But it was also one of the innovative genres to, and I think one of the reasons it was so innovative was because there wasn't the same pressures. We have to make sure that we reflect our stars positively. And that's one of the reasons that the studios were afraid to get into film noir, because they didn't want to see their stars playing unsavory characters. A lot of these characters, like there's a movie Detour that was shot by the great John Alton. And also there was it's in Night Rain. It has a mention for a reason. There's one that John Alton shot called He Walked by Night, which was based on an actual crime that took place in Los Angeles, a guy who was going after cops. So the way we shot that scene was deliberate. We shot it in homage to John Alton. It's also Jack Webb was part of He Walked by Night. Well, Jack Webb wrote a book called The Badge, and one of the chapters is about Elizabeth Short. He was really the person who sort of turned the opinion of her towards she was a drifter, she was a loner, she was possibly even a prostitute. He kind of started that whole wave in that direction. So there really isn't a moment in Night Rain that doesn't have some kind of significance. It's just how deep does the audience want to go into it? That's really, I'm inviting people to go into a world. You can go as deep as you want to go. That's really what Night Rain is. It's like, you can stay here and hopefully you'll find something in it. But if you want to keep going through those layers, you're just going to find more and more, which is what it's like to research films noir and the murder of Elizabeth Short. It's a rabbit hole. Like we were talking about, it's kind of full circle, because you were saying, isn't that the interesting thing about film, is you never just say, I'm done learning. Every time you take a step in that direction, you discover. And I think maybe that is what repels some people, because it's like, I don't like confronting what I don't know. I don't like to feel like I don't know something.
Mhm.
Especially if you've got a shaky self-esteem, because saying you don't know is the same as saying I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
Whereas for those of us who it's like, well, I don't know is not, my self-esteem isn't built on that.
Mhm.
So it's like, if someone asks me a question, I don't know. If someone says, well, how do you get this kind of bokeh in your shot? The answer is, I don't know. I have so much to learn. How do you cut a film this way? I don't know. How do you write this? Oh, that I do know. Okay, let's work on that. Oh, what about this? Okay, well, I'm gonna have to learn about that because I don't know. You see, so it's just, that's the ongoing process. And I'm just amazed, especially with some of the feedback on Night Rain. I'm like, because some people are like, oh my God, I totally get this. And I'm like, that's so cool. And other people are like, I didn't get this. What about this? And I'm like, gee, did I not communicate that well? Like, some people get it, some people don't. Like, boy, I have a lot to learn as a filmmaker. That's just what I come to then, is I'm like, because I kind of come from the school of, this isn't really wrong. If that's how they experience a movie, that's how they experience a movie. You can't really say that's not right. But at the same time, you're wondering, you're like, maybe I need to think about how I convey things, how I translate or share information. What do I show on screen, and why does that matter? Just consider the audience more and more. But at the same time, retain a vision. It's really a challenge. But that's where
Tommy Wiseau line, right?
Oh yeah. Oh, which one? Well, the one about that I told you about, which one? Which one?
You must do what the audience wants. You must have a vision. Yeah.
You must have vision. You must do what the audience want. You must have vision.
Yeah.
Don't those two? Yes, that's right. We were talking about that because I was thinking about that. Because
You're like, yep, that's what you got to do. How do you do it? Thanks.
He's right. And how do you resolve those two things? Because sometimes they don't go together. And again, that's the mark of a great filmmaker. I took on a lot in Night Rain, but it was the time. It was the right time. I took on a lot. And that project, originally I wanted that to be a nice little project, mainly shot in a room. And it did not turn out that way. And I'm happy for how it turned out, but it got bigger. It got bigger very quickly, and it got bigger mostly in pre-production. Oh my God, we're going to need this focus puller up. We're going to have this person be the gaffer. We ended up probably with at least 4 more, if not 5 more crew people. And at one time, for this little movie, we had over 40 people on set one day. We had over 40 people. And I was just like, what have I done? I was like, what have I done? This was supposed to be people fitting in one room. What happened? But that's where I say sometimes you just got to let the film tell you what it wants, almost like a child. You can't control it, because the film will tell you what it wants and what it needs to be what it wants to be, because it does sort of take on a life of its own. And the vision has requirements. And if the vision is going to be realized, it will let you know. I think there's a point where some filmmakers, like you have somebody like Scorsese, who's made so many films, who probably has gotten pretty good at determining these things at the starting gate, even before the starting gate. But I think that does take time. I think it does take time. And you hear about, people will say, oh my God, that was Sam Mendes' first film, American Beauty, which was a beautiful film. But he also had done so much theater. He had done tons of theater before he made that movie. And Alan Ball is another exceptional screenwriter whom I really love as in terms of contemporary screenwriters.
I love that film as well. Right? It's so good. Yeah.
Oh my God. And then you read the screenplay and you're like, well, Alan Ball served this remarkably polished screenplay to a very experienced theater director, and they made a good team, and they shared a vision, and they had everything all done. They had they had a very clear vision, and they had very clear. I've looked at some of the director's notes and the storyboards, and they were very clear about what they were doing. And
yeah. I saw a video on that as well on YouTube. Somebody showed me those storyboards. The whole thing, every image was very well scripted.
And they had the budget, and again, this is where budget does come in, because if you have a certain budget, you can't make so many demands on people that they'll walk away from you. You can only expect them to do so much for free before you're taking advantage of them. You have to make sure you really balance that out, and you're not, because I'm someone who I won't take advantage of people that way. And I won't abuse their time. And you're also shooting more pages a day. So that's the challenge of indie filmmaking. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to do a movie about indie filmmaking, because you're trying to achieve this monumentality with your movie. You want to make a great film, but the resources you have are so different than if you're on a studio set. You can't even compare it. So how do you do that? How do you accomplish that? And of course, I was very influenced by LA Confidential. I've read the novel, I've read the screenplay, I've seen the movie many times. Obviously, I've visited the locations. I think that is one of the great modern neo-noir masterpieces, LA Confidential. And there's another writer I love, Brian Helgeland. Brian Helgeland, who adapted Mystic River for Clint Eastwood, but who, by the way, he talks about this during his the talk he gave at the BFI, at the British Film Institute. He talks about how he originally turned it down. He told his agent to say no, because he was just wanting to enjoy time with his family. At the time, he'd done a bunch of scripts in a row, and he said Clint Eastwood came to his house and kind of like for a while just kind of stood there drinking a glass of water, and finally was like, so you're going to do it, kind of in a Dirty Harry kind of way. It's like, so you're going to do it. And he's like, yes, Mr. Eastwood. Yes. And that's how it happened. And he did a brilliant job of adapting that novel for the screen. Brian Helgeland is another remarkable screenwriter. And these are the people we can be inspired by, we can read. And you'll notice, what don't they often do? Most of them don't give advice. They don't give advice, especially when it comes to writing, because they know advice doesn't come with insurance. They know advice isn't what makes a great screenplay.
Yeah.
Doing the work makes a great screenplay. Writing.
It's so interesting how many parallels we have in our own experience. I met a woman today even who was like, please, she writes in Norwegian. She was like, please, Leo, can you just learn Norwegian so that you can read my writing and give me advice on it? And I was like, that's very flattering, but that's not the barrier. The point is, I don't know what to do. I can't help you tell your stories. Like, I can ask you some questions, and then I can leave you alone, and you can disregard them all.
But you just hit the nail on the head. I can't help you tell your story. What you can do, what anybody can do, what writers I've known can do, like Jennifer Knox and Matt Cook, extremely talented writers. They've taught creative writing. They've taught composition. but what they teach is generally the techniques, the technical aspects of writing. What you can't teach someone is how to be a writer. You can't teach someone, as you just said, how do you tell your story? I can't give you your voice.
I don't know what it is, yeah.
No, you're 100%. You're 100%.
Because also,
you can't teach someone. You can give someone tools to write and direct or act, but you can't make them the director, the writer, the actor they want to be.
No.
That person has to find that for themselves.
So that was part 2. At the end of this chat, I start to say goodbye, and then we start to talk about films, and then that becomes another episode. So that's coming later. Cheers for making it this far. If you're some sort of creative who wants to be on the show, or if you want to tell me something about it, you can always do so using losingtheplotpodcast-at-gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. That's all for this episode. So until next time, bye bye.